Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Before we moved to New Zealand, I had my own office in India. And there was this building. It used to be an old school. It was called Alvarez House. I was just looking for office space. I didn't have any specifications in mind. A nice, bright room, that would do for me. Low rent, well, not a high rent, that would do nicely as well. But as it turned out, Alvarez House was this hub of creative activity. We had 3 or 4 photographers there. We had people from ad agencies. We had the creative director of Elle magazine who was freelancing from that place. And there was me. I was a cartoonist. So all of these people in one space, and I got to know all of them really well. However, one of them became a really good friend of mine. And this guy was an amazing photographer. Back when Photoshop was just starting to move, he was already a maestro at Photoshop. He just worked his way around Photoshop. He would take the most amazing photos. He had actresses, sports stars, all kinds of assignments. And yet, when all of the lights turned off and we had these conversations, occasionally he would tell me that he didn't go to university. And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out why he would bring that up. He was already very successful. He had bought his house. He'd paid for his house. He'd done all of this stuff single-handedly. But that one little university thing, that seemed to be a bad sector in his brain somehow. He seemed like a fraud, at least to himself. And this is what we're talking about today, the imposter syndrome. What is the imposter syndrome? Why does it occur? Let's find out in today's episode. As far as I know, there seem to be 2 factors that I can think of when it comes to the imposter syndrome. The first thing is that your product or your service is not worthy, and second is that you are not worthy. But let's say you woke up today and you brushed your teeth. And all across the world, let's say 7 billion people are doing something similar. They too are brushing your teeth. Let's assume that some of them have a superior method to you. It doesn't bother you, does it? And that's because it's a private act. There's no one around to judge you. Writing a diary, making a to-do list, going shopping, they're all individual acts. And in every situation, there is someone else doing a far superior job than you and me. But we don't stop to think about it until that act becomes public. And we realize that the task itself might not be the problem, but it's the perception of how we will be judged. And that's the real problem. It's also the first part of the imposter syndrome. We truly believe that our product or our service is not worthy. That book, that report, that speech, or maybe you did a little cartoon. We somehow believe that it's useless, or it's not as good, or it could be better. And it exposes us to attack. That attack starts in our own brain, of course, but it exposes us to attack. Maybe someone else has written a blog post on the same topic. Maybe they've written a book or 2 books. And at that point we think, what could our product or service do to add to their mix? How could it be different? And yet when we look at it from the lens of a camera, we know that 20 people could take the same photograph and they're all different. And if it were looked at from different angles, then it would be different yet again. If the background was changed, again, it would be different. If the angles were changed, again, it would be different. Even if we were to go to Amazon.com, look at a book, go through the table of contents, pick the exact name of the chapter, every chapter, and then write the book. Technically, we've ripped off someone else's text, right? They're just their chapter names. But what you wrote in that chapter would be completely different. It would not be repetitive. And yet, when we're out there trying to present our product or service, it shrivels in the light of day. We like to keep it in the dark. We like to keep it safe. We like to keep it private. And there it's fine. So the first factor of the imposter syndrome is not that our product is not worthy. It's not that we feel that way at all, because we have created it. We're okay with it in the diary. We're okay with it in the dark. It's just that outside, that glare that we're not ready for. So hang on to that thought while we go to the second part. And the second part is that you are not worthy. About 6 or 7 years after we started Psychotactics, we had the Brain Audit workshop. Now, it's not like I hadn't made the presentation of the Brain Audit before. If anything, it was a presentation that I'd made more than any other. I'd presented it at venues in Auckland, then through the US. We'd gone in 2004 right through the US. I made many presentations of the Brain Audit. And then somehow we decided, let's do a 2-day workshop, a full-blown 2-day workshop. And that's when I got the jitters. I prepared diligently, of course, I always do. But there was no way that I could not feel like an imposter. And you say, why? Why would that be the case? And in this case, it was because of the audience. Almost 70% of the audience were existing clients. We were on version 3.0 of the Brain Audit. Many of those clients had read version 1.0 or at least 2.0. And they were part of discussions in 5000 BC. And they talked about the Brain Audit, they talked about other stuff. But after all of this time, I'm on the East Coast of the US, and I have to present to these very same clients. And my question, the question that's going through my head is, why would they not be bored? They had heard all of this before. They had read the Brain Audit thrice like I asked them to. They'd probably gone through discussions many times. How was I going to go through 2 days of this stuff with them and not bore them in some way? How could I just stand there and go through those slides or go through those exercises and not feel like a fraud? The only reassurance I had was that Renuka said, look, they haven't experienced it in this way before. And, people tell you stuff like that and you understand it intellectually, but you don't get it emotionally. I was feeling more and more like an imposter as I counted down the days. And then, of course, the day finally arrives. There's nothing you can do. But let's fast forward to the first break. But why the first break? Because it was a benchmark moment for me. I realized at that point, that first break, that no one was bored. No one was getting upset. I had these excited faces in the room. People who had read every version were still getting great value from being at the event. And why? Why should this be a surprise to me? We already know that we can read a book 10 times over and always learn something different, always have something dramatic, even on the 10th reading. We could listen to an audiobook for the second time, third time, fourth time, still get something different. We could watch videos over and over again. And even in a live event, we go to a concert, for instance. There are people who go 25 concerts of Toto, 25 concerts of Sting, and they still get something different every single time. In retrospect, I shouldn't have been surprised at all, but I was. And it's only when the break rolled along that the penny dropped. I didn't have that imposter syndrome anymore. That's not as if to say that the imposter syndrome doesn't come back. Many years later, when I launched the dartboard pricing series, I was nervous yet again. I had written dozens of articles on pricing. We had so many discussions and clarifications on 5000 BC. Why would anyone want to buy books? Why would anyone want to buy 3 books? I know intellectually that every experience, every iteration is different, but there's still a factor of imposter syndrome, or at least this genuine surprise. What's important to note at this stage that it's not the content, it's not the product, it's not the course, it's not the workshop, it's not the report. That's not the problem at all. It's me. And there's only one way I know how to stop this imposter syndrome. And you've probably guessed the answer already. You have to bring it out of the darkness. You have to bring it into the light. This might mean that selling your product or even doing a free event or course is what you're required to do, what I require to do. Something that was private now needs to be made public. Real people need to see it, to touch it, to feel it, to experience it. In my case, I needed to get to the first break for the Brain Audit workshop. In your case, it might be sooner, it might be later, it might be the end of the day of the project. However, it's only when it's done and when you felt that reaction from the audience that you're going to relax a bit. You start to sense that your imposter syndrome is losing some of its power. To be fair, not all imposter syndromes have happy endings. You may start with a lot of enthusiasm and you're eager to subdue that imposter, but then you have a workshop or you have a little event and then you don't get an audience. We've had workshops where we've showed up tentatively and we've had to play to almost an empty room. In one workshop, we had 1 person turn up. At one event, we had 3 people turn up. So if you're starting out in your career, you're more than likely to have these situations where your audience is tiny or even no-shows. And even down the road, something like that might happen. So this imposter syndrome keeps coming back time and time again, and the only way to keep it at bay is to change your strategy. When you change your strategy and you come back persistently, that's when you can keep it at bay. I'd like to say that I don't have the imposter syndrome anymore. I know how it works. I know how it works for both the product and for what's happening in my head. So both of those situations. But it will be back. I know that for sure. I can't say when or why, but it will be back. And so will I. I refuse to give up, and that's the only defense I know. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. What did we learn? It's very simple. The imposter syndrome isn't necessarily because our product is bad, because our service is bad. It's primarily because now we have to show it to someone else and we feel, wait a second, this isn't good enough. So that's the first thing. But the second one is this chatter that we feel that someone will judge us, not even the product or the service, that somehow we will fall short of their expectations. And it might happen, but you learn from it and you come back, and that's how you get better, because otherwise it's not like you stand still. If you don't get better, you don't stand still, you get worse. So you don't have much of an option. Getting up, dusting yourself and starting all over again, that's probably the only way anyone can move forward. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. One of the big imposter syndromes is this statement, I can't draw a straight line. When we started out the cartooning course many years ago, I think it was 2010, that was the kind of statement that we'd hear all the time. And I wasn't keen on starting the course, but this guy, Joseph, he bugged me a lot and he said, can you do this course? Can you do this course? I've done all the courses before. And I thought, okay, I'll just do this thing. And as a result, now we've had a few hundred people who've been able to draw. So this is not something that's an if, but it is a when. And the when is at the end of the cartooning course. People are able to draw when in the past they said, I can't draw. So there's this huge imposter syndrome that I can't draw. And it holds us back because inherently we know that we can. All of us were drawing until the age of 5 or 6. And the reason why it looks like as if it were drawn by a 5 or 6-year-old is because we stopped. And you'd think, well, what about all those 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how old you are? What about that? The point is that you don't need to put in all that time if you have a system in place. And that's what the cartooning course is all about. That's what all the courses are about. For the cartooning course, we only have 30 seats. The bookings open on the 22nd of June. For the headline course, I think we have about 25 seats. I'm not sure. I think it's 25 seats. And that opens on the 29th of June. Both of these require you to either be a 5000 BC member, which gives you first preference, or secondly, you can be on the waiting list and then get on the course. But 5000 BC is a great place to be anyway, because it's full of introverts, and the motto is be kind, be helpful, or be gone. And you'll find that for yourself when you join 5000 BC. So we'll see you in 5000 BC, or we'll see you in one of these courses. Remember, the 22nd of June or the 29th of June, and you have to be on the waiting list, otherwise you get no notification. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. Bye-bye.